Hello! Today we are making sinigang. Alright. So this is gonna be my take on a classic Filipino dish called sinigang, which is basically a pork and tamarind soup with a bunch of vegetables in it, usually served with a side of rice. So let's get the chopping. We got a lot of veggies going into this dish, which is great. So first, I'm gonna start with this onion. We're gonna go ahead and cut it all the way through. And we're gonna do some small to medium dices, depending on how oniony you like your soups. Cut that in half. And this is a pretty large onion, so I'm just gonna go with half of this onion today. All right, next we're gonna go with some green beans. So I got a big pack of green beans here, and what I'm gonna do is cut off both ends of the green beans, cut them into about 2-inch pieces, and then drop in my colander and do a little rinse. Let's do it. Okay, here's the last batch of our green beans. Take a small pile, put them all together, cut off the ends, flip it around, tap it all together so the ends are all in the same spot. Cut off the ends, move them around so they're kind of centered with each other. Cut it right down the middle for some nice sized pieces. Now with our green beans, since they're in our colander, we're gonna go ahead and give a quick rinse. Green beans aren't usually that dirty, but we do want to give them a little bit of a rinse. We'll just pour it into a bowl until we're ready for them. Next up on the list of veggies is some bok choy. And I'm using baby bok choy here. So we're gonna go ahead and open it up, and I put a towel in here just to catch any extra moisture to help keep the bok choy dry in here. It doesn't get all slimy in the fridge, you know what I mean? So with our bok choy, we're gonna take it out, then I cut off the butts. See if there's any other butts we wanna cut off. Pop it in to a bowl. Same with the rest. And the reason why I like to cut off the bottom parts of bok choy is sometimes there's a lot of dirt hiding right underneath the layers. So when you cut it, you'll be able to open up the layers and get all that dirt that may be hiding underneath. This bag seems to look pretty clean, which, hey, lucky times. Okay, now that all of our bok choy has been cut into our colander, we're gonna do a little wash, some cold water, just to get any dirt off if there's any in here. Go ahead and give it a little massage. And then we're gonna go ahead and fish it out. Now, if you look into our water here, you can see there's some dirt that came off of our bok choy, which is why we need to wash it and separate it afterwards. The next veggie on our list is Chinese eggplant. Now, Chinese eggplant differs from an American eggplant or westernized eggplant because it's skinnier and longer than our fat counterpart. Still just as tasty. So I'm gonna do a little rinse. Gonna cut the top off. Cut off just a bit of the bottom. And for my sinigang, I like to have half moon shapes. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut it down lengthwise. And from there, cut about 1/4 inch slices. Boom. So just until you get some nice moon shape, crescent moons. Next up, we have some daikon radish. Now, if you've never seen a daikon radish, it's gonna be this white, a little greenish on top, very heavy vegetable. Usually comes pretty large like this. Sometimes they'll be smaller, but majority of the time when I see it, they're pretty big. So I'm gonna go ahead and do a little rinse. And I'm going to peel my radish first. And radish has a very fresh flavor when eaten raw. It's delicious pickled in like Vietnamese dishes. If you get like pickled radish, that's usually gonna be the daikon radish. But in our application, when we cook it in our broth, it's gonna be nice and soft and just gives such a nice texture and addition to our sinigang soups. Okay, our daikon is all peeled. I'm gonna go ahead and cut off a bit of the bottom, cut off some of that top, And I'm gonna cut it in half just to make it a little bit easier to work with. And same thing as our eggplant, I'm gonna make our crescent moon shapes. So go ahead and cut it down the middle and run my knife through about 1/8 of an inch or so. Nice little crescent moon shapes. Okay, our daikon is all sliced up. Let's get her into the bowl. Lastly, I'm going to open up one of our serrano peppers. Now this is definitely optional. I personally like my sinigang to have a little bit of kick to it, but not a huge amount. So what I do is I'm gonna take a serrano, I'm gonna cut off the top, I'm gonna split it open in half, and I'm going to remove the seeds and the membranes so that way it gives the flavor of the serrano but not too much of the heat. So I'm just gonna go ahead and just kind of scrape those seeds out and then just kind of cut off some of that membrane. Just remove that. A little bit is okay. All right, so that was all of our veggies, and now we're gonna move on to our pork. And for my pork sinigang, I like to use these pork spare rib crosscut version. I'm Chinese and I'm used to this version of spare ribs. However, if you have different types of spare ribs that you like to use or different part of the pork that you like to use, go for it. I know this is definitely not traditional, but this is what I'm used to, so we're gonna go with that. Now, this cut of pork you'll usually see whenever you order black bean spare ribs at a Chinese restaurant. That's the kind of pork this is gonna be. So when you buy it at the store, it comes in these long ribs all together, and you'll see that there's the individual bones connecting them. So I'm gonna separate these pieces. So on my board, you'll be able to see each bone, and we're just gonna go ahead and just cut in between so that way you get each bone in one piece with some meat on the side. Again, slice through the middle, slice through the middle, like so, and we're gonna keep going for all the pieces. Okay, that's all the pork cut up. We're gonna wash our hands and get cooking. In a large pot, we're gonna go ahead and turn it on to about a medium-high. Add some extra virgin olive oil, just enough to coat the bottom. Okay, our pot is nice and warm. We're gonna go ahead and toss in our onions. And we're gonna start to sweat those for just about a minute or so. Okay, our onions have given off a little bit of flavor into our oil. So next, what I'm gonna do is actually push the onions over to the side of our pot. Push them all over to the side. From there, we're gonna plop in our pork pieces right into the pot. And you want the pork to get contact with the bottom of the pot so that way it can get a little bit of browning on it. Add a touch more oil here. And what we're doing right now is just getting some brown color on the outside of our pork. We're definitely not gonna cook it all the way through at this stage. So what we're doing is allowing it to get a nice coloration. Once it happens, you'll be able to lift it easily and then get some color on the other side of our pork. I'm gonna take my spatula here and just simply lift off the pork. We're gonna mix it around. Got a little bit of brown color on one side. This is what we like. Got a lot of bits on the bottom, which is a lot of flavor. Now I'm gonna go ahead and just mix it in with our onions and just allow this to kind of sit for a couple more minutes. As we can see here, our pork has gotten a little bit of color on it. Our onions are getting soft. We got a lot of good bits on the bottom of our pot here. At this stage, I'm gonna go ahead and add in our tamarind powder. And so I like to use this brand, Knorr Tamarind Soup Base Powder. And you can definitely use raw tamarind and make your own tamarind paste. But I like this shortcut. So I'm gonna go ahead and just snip off the top. And for this giant pot, I like to use 2 packets. Go ahead and just sprinkle that all over our pork and onions. And if you've never had tamarind before, it's a little on the sour side, and that's what really gives it that nice tang that this dish needs. So go ahead and mix that tamarind powder into our pork and onions. Start to glaze it up a little bit. And we don't want this to burn. We're just kind of coating the meat so that way it tenderizes it just a bit. We're gonna go ahead and add in our chicken broth. Now you can use chicken broth, you can use veggie broth, you can use water, whatever you got on hand. I personally just like using the low sodium chicken broth to just give it a little more flavor. Right into the pot. Give that a nice stir. And when the broth starts to boil up, it's gonna also start to release those little bits that got stuck onto the bottom. And that's all that pork flavor that we want to get infused into this broth. I'm gonna go ahead and add in our daikon radish. So carefully just plop it right in. We're gonna pop the lid on and allow this to come up to a boil. So our soup has come up to a boil, roll and boil. At this stage, we're gonna add our serrano pepper, woo, hot, and our eggplant. Carefully dropping it in. Give that a stir, and I'm gonna bring it down to about a medium. Put the top just slightly off so it allows it to steam out a little bit and not overboil. And I'm gonna allow this to simmer for quite a while. We're gonna go until our daikon is fully soft and our eggplant has softened up as well. Okay, it's been about 10 minutes, almost 10 minutes. And you can feel that there's no more bits at the bottom since the boiling process helped lift all that flavor into the broth. Our daikon and our eggplants are nice and soft. You can see they're kind of changed color, a little translucent now. Same with our onions. Now is a good time to do a little taste test. And here's a little trick I like to do. Learned this in the restaurant. As you can see, there's a lot of fat and oil that came off from the olive oil and the pork. And you don't want to actually drink that. So with your ladle, you're going to create a little whirlwind at the bottom of your ladle to kind of press or to kind of push away the oil. So when you grab it, you're only grabbing the broth and not the oil. Ooh, that's great. So now I'm actually gonna kill the heat. Like how I said, there's a lot of oil on top. So we're gonna use our ladle and skim it off. So you wanna carefully take your ladle, just glide it along the top of your soup, and you can see all that oil and grease. We'll just slowly slide into that ladle and kind of lift it around, move it around. Go slow, be patient. Another way to do this by skimming the fat is to actually allow the soup to fully cool down. Put it in the fridge, and once it's cold, the oil actually solidifies and you can easily just scrape off that top layer of fat and oil. Because you like that flavor, but you don't need all that fat. Okay, so we got majority of that fat and oil out. There's still a tiny bit left in there, but that's definitely okay. That tiny bit is way better than this much oil and fat in your broth. I'm gonna move this to the side, and the best way to dispose of this is allow it to cool down, pop it in a plastic bag, and throw it in the trash. Do not put this down your drains. To our sinigang, I'm gonna add some freshly cracked black pepper. And the tamarind powder that we used already had salt in it, and our chicken broth was low sodium, so there's a bit of salt in there, so we don't need to add any more salt. Adjust seasoning to your taste preferences. Now, this is a little trick I like to do. Because this is a huge pot of sinigang, we're definitely not going to finish it in one sitting, which means it's going to be in the fridge. Because it's going to sit in the fridge, I don't like to add the bok choy and the green beans straight into this pot and fully cook it and then pop it into the fridge. What happens with bok choy when it's sitting in liquid in the fridge is it tends to get mushy, and for me it gets a little bitter once it gets reheated. Same with the green beans, it gets really mushy and loses its texture and color. So what I like to do is take a smaller pot. We're gonna just ladle the amount that we want to eat. So enough for a good portion. Make sure you get a few pieces of pork, good amount of that eggplant and daikon and onions, good amount of that broth, right into the pot. From here, I'm gonna bring this up onto my heat. We're gonna add in our green beans and also our bok choy. Now I'm gonna go ahead and put a lid on this, allow it to boil for a couple of minutes to soften up our bok choy and our green beans, and then we're ready to plate up. And here we have our sinigang. Thanks for joining us. Now get out of my kitchen.